Welcome to TalentMotives, the deep dive, uncovering what drives you.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a framework today called Motivation DNA. The mission here is to figure out why, you might leave a grueling 3-hour strategy meeting feeling totally energized.
But just 10 minutes of mundane data entry makes you want to take a nap under your desk.
Exactly.
Yeah. And most of us are pretty well versed in standard personality tests. So we've taken them for work or maybe just out of curiosity. But the research we're diving into highlights a pretty significant blind spot in those traditional systems. They categorize how we act, but they completely fail to explain the why.
The psychological engine driving that behavior.
Right.
I get that limitation, but aren't we kind of just swapping one set of labels for another here? Like, if a traditional test tells me I'm an extrovert and Motivation DNA tells me I'm driven by influence, isn't that effectively just a rebrand?
It sounds like it on the surface, but the distinction is actually deeply rooted in decades of motivational psychology. Motivation DNA doesn't just drop you into a broad personality bucket. Instead, it measures 24 specific, measurable dimensions of intrinsic drivers.
24? That's a lot.
It is. The framework compares it directly to a biological blueprint. So, just as physical DNA dictates your biological traits, this maps out your unique psychological wiring. It pinpoints the exact elements of a task that will either fuel your success or trigger deep frustration.
That blueprint analogy really clicks when you see it play out in a real environment. A while back, I was working on a major product launch, and I was hyper-focused on the curiosity dimension.
The research phase.
Yeah, exactly. I was tearing apart the market research, obsessively trying to learn everything about the changing user base. I loved that phase, but putting together the actual pitch deck to sell the strategy felt like pulling teeth. Right. Meanwhile, my co-lead, who is heavily driven by influence, absolutely thrived on crafting that persuasive narrative and presenting it to the board, but they dreaded the initial research phase.
Which perfectly illustrates the danger of treating people as interchangeable skill sets. You had two professionals operating in leadership roles for the exact same launch, but your underlying fuel sources were completely different.
Right.
If a manager attempts to motivate the curiosity-driven employee using the exact same incentives they use for the influence-driven employee, one of them is inevitably going to burn out.
Or just completely disengage, which means understanding these 24 dimensions extends way beyond standard corporate management strategies. It cascades into almost every area where human behavior is a factor.
Absolute.
Like a college student could use this map to choose a major that actually sustains their intellectual interest over 4 years. Nonprofits can use it to structure a volunteer opportunity so people actually want to come back.
And on a personal level, families can use it to decode their own communication styles. It removes the constant guesswork of trying to figure out what makes the people around you tick.
But charting 24 individual dimensions of human psychology is incredibly complex data to manage on your own.
It is. And to bridge that gap, the framework introduces a really practical mechanism. It's an AI-powered coaching interface called MQi LiDi AI.
I was wondering how this actually functions in practice. Is it just a static PDF report you read once during an onboarding session and then immediately forget about?
Not at all. Because it's built as an interactive AI model, it acts dynamically. It processes your specific combination of those 24 intrinsic dimensions and translates that complex psychological data into everyday situational guidance.
Okay, so how would I use it?
Well, you could theoretically prompt the interface before a difficult performance review to understand precisely how your specific drivers might clash with your managers. Or you could use it to evaluate a potential career shift by asking it to cross-reference the daily realities of the new job against your motivation DNA profile.
Wow, that fundamentally changes how you prepare for high-stakes conversations. Instead of relying on generic leadership advice, you're getting targeted strategies on how to bridge the gap between your intrinsic motivations and someone whose psychological wiring might be the complete opposite of yours.
Exactly. Ultimately, the central premise of this entire framework is the power of alignment. When organizations and individuals stop viewing people merely as their job titles or technical competencies and start aligning their daily responsibilities with these deep-seated intrinsic motivators, the results are undeniable.
Yeah.
Performance improves naturally, engagement lasts significantly longer, and people feel far more fulfilled in their day-to-day lives.
It definitely makes you look at your own to-do list a bit differently, which leaves us with a fascinating question to consider as we wrap up today's deep dive. The framework heavily relies on comparing these intrinsic drivers to biological DNA,
which is a fixed physical code.
Exactly, it's unchangeable. But considering how much our lives, careers, and personal priorities evolve over decades, is it possible that your 24 dimensions of motivation DNA aren't entirely static? Could they actually shift and mutate as you enter entirely new seasons of life? Something for you to ponder on your own.
Find out more about MQi and LiDi AI by visiting our website at TalentMotives.com.